We're live from the Sydney studios in Australia. Jump into the chat room at freedomslips.com while we're on air. You can listen to us from there. And also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Who of you aren't following us? Our website, shinysideout.net, has the show archives, show notes, and links we paste into the chat during the show. Mekhi knows just how many ways there are to listen to us. If you live in Kentucky, FM WZZR 101.3, you can get an app, Revolution Radio, TalkStream Live, TuneIn.com, Radio Tuner, Spreaker.com, iHeart, Live 365, and our very own Shiny Side Out application available on both platforms. At home, you can listen to us on a Grace tabletop digital radio or driving around in your General Motors vehicle with a receiver-enabled radio. All are revolutions in radio. Or you can also check out the freedomslips.com. You can get a CD of your favorite host for $30, and a portion of that goes to the host. This is for the 2013 season. Let's check it out. So far, I know 0 people have purchased one because we would have been informed by the station owner, and I just encourage you all to maybe get the best bits or something. I don't know what it is. Check it out. And don't forget to message either Mekhi and I. You can do that via our website. Say hello. You can do it via any of the other platforms, of course, that I previously mentioned. If you are in the USA, and our greater listening audience is, you can call in to the show while we're on air on 347-688-2902, or if you have Skype, simply add Freedom Screen. It's really easy, and you can call us up during the show. We'd actually prefer you jump in the chat room in freedomslips.com and chat to us while we're on air first. If you have something really super interesting to bring up, it would be awesome that you do, and we do encourage it. But chat to us first. I'm having all sorts of technical difficulties at this end. The webcam isn't working. So if any of you who were expecting to join into the live stream currently isn't working for today. I'll pick it up in YouTube, and I might put a slide deck together or something. But anyway, Laura is amazing, and I've listened to so many of her interviews, and I just knew the moment I heard the first one that we needed her on. Thank you, Laura, for coming on. Laura is an intuitive astrologist, global alchemist, cosmic mythologist, and is the great-granddaughter of Dwight D. Eisenhower. She is on a profound mission to reveal our true origins, connected with the Magdalene and Gaia Sophia energies of love and wisdom, and works to liberate us from the military-industrial complex, the archonic systems, and false power structures as well. These forces connect many dots that are coming into our awareness now more than ever as our solar system aligns with the galactic plane. I love that you mentioned that. Laura, welcome to Shiny Side Out.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
You know, there's so much to you. I have to tell you, because we haven't chatted before, except via email, and one of the things was I'm a UFO experiencer. I have just written it all down, and I've self-published something, and it's interesting, and it made me feel good in my own skin. But one of the things that I've never felt comfortable with was that the governments turn their back on you. UFOs aren't real, there's no such thing as life in the rest of the galaxy. The thing that's annoyed me and all the other people who have ever been taken is disclosure. Do you think it's coming?
Yeah, I think it's already here. I think if we look to the governments, by the time they actually share anything, it's going to be when an agenda is so implanted and in place that it's going to be more about how we're going to adjust to this agenda more so than disclosing something that's going to be about our liberation, just because when we look at the governments and all the power structures in the world, the infiltration is so obvious that, by the time they admit to anything, with all their COINTELPRO and the smearing campaigns and the promotion of the less than favorable relations amongst, certain ones that might be planted in the, this movement that, share sort of a distorted message, would sort of lead us down the wrong path. And there's, obviously positive elements and things that, we would benefit from knowing about that I don't know if they would readily disclose, because that would benefit us as humans on a, our personal sovereignty level and, our ability to shift into higher earth energies, which they don't want to see, which is why they've kept so much in secrecy, because this is the time that we, naturally are doing this with the help of our fellow, higher dimensional beings that we're connected with.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that it's unlikely that they're going to disclose anything until they're pressed on it. Like, you don't just quit a game if you're playing it until there's no point to winning. You're pressed into winning. Oh, so
yeah, and they know, and they have technologies that can kind of gauge, how humanity or certain groups in humanity are going to react to certain things, based on the false flags they do in the news. With certain technologies they have, like Looking Glass, which is quantum access type technology, and just even, we hear about time travel, and Montauk and all these different ways that they can, look ahead and look behind and implement these things. And then, there's ways for them to see how the likely reaction is going to be. So this has all been methodically set up, and even things like the Occupy movement and things that would maybe push them into a corner to disclose is something they're aware of. So the thing that is the most alarming is, how they talk about when a person's in their spiritual development, it's like peeling an onion. Well, same thing with the shadow government, because of compartmentalism. You just keep peeling away and you just get to the core of it. And they're pretty much in the know about, all sorts of astrological events, the geophysics of the planet. I mean, the higher dimensional beings that don't really intervene but are there if we really invoke them and step up ourselves, are one thing, but the ones that have sort of fallen or been hybridized or been dragged into these agendas and have been sort of enslaved themselves, which appear as extraterrestrials, that's all a part of the mix too. And there's just a lot of strategizing that goes into handling all sorts of things that would push disclosure. And so the reason everything's been covert is because by the time that happens, they're already going to be ready to introduce the things that will further immerse us into this, and they'll present it to the public in a way that they'll agree with, because they can only manipulate our free will. They can't actually, take it. And so that's what the false flags are. That's what the geoengineering is and the chemtrails is, to basically catch us in this web. And then as things get disclosed, it's in the timing of when we can't really get out of the web. And then all of a sudden these overlords are, running the show for reasons that most of humanity will buy into, or they'll be chipped and won't know the difference. And that's, one scenario, but once you break away from the programming, you're not on that timeline anymore. And the governments are not going to tell us about that. And that's in relation to these higher dimensional beings. And I think, the experiencer and contactee type thing that's going on is, a mixture of all of it. And, of course, your story and what you've gone through, gives you a piece of that. Which I'm sure explains a lot.
I think you're right. They won't do it till they're forced to do it, to do disclosure. But they've set that plan up and they know what to do. It's not like they're set off balance.
Right.
Yeah.
And they will be set off balance by our spiritual development, and stuff like that, but not in a new agey, deceptive kind of way or in a religious dogma type of way. It's about our expansion into our multidimensional nature. But because, everything has been so distorted, most people are even repelled by some of that terminology. But I think most people understand that it is an inner process of empowerment and just kind of breaking free of the bonds and not, submitting to the fear or the programming by just going into zombie mode. And so, enough souls are kind of catching on, but it's definitely something that's been in place, similar to the economy collapsing. I mean, a lot of people say, oh, well, everything's collapsing. And it's like, yeah, I'd love to think that, we've got that one on them as well. But when you think about the other currency they're going to introduce, which has to do with chipping, there are things, that are controlled that appear to be revolutionary. Like, like a controlled collapse of the economy for some would seem like a good breakthrough, when in actual fact the next stage might be, pulling us further into the artificial intelligence system that has a whole different kind of currency. So we don't want to look to the government for, the quick solution or the scientific breakthroughs. We got to look to each other, because there's people amongst us that have the knowledge, the wisdom, the free energy technologies, those that are the whistleblowers, those that have been sort of hidden themselves, that haven't been properly funded. We could just do this all ourselves. We got to starve the beast and just say, okay, governments, thanks for lying to us this whole time. You don't deserve our ears anymore. We're going to look to each other now. And then that should fall away. And that's really, I think, all we've got going for us right now. And it's a good thing, because that's how we liberate ourselves. We can't liberate ourselves by expecting the trap to wake up. We got to, just step away and say, hey, I'm not going to go into the trap anymore.
Yeah, you make a good point. Do you think that some of this evolution of us, not them, of the governments, not of the governments, but of us, do you think some of that evolution is like, you mentioned like expansion of the mind? What about our faculties? What about people becoming more aware, not just around them, but maybe like it's like the book of how to control our mind, or how to use telepathy or anything, was lost or not given to us or taken away. Do you think that that's going to be part of our growth?
Well, it really has to be. The original Atlantis and Lemuria, we were able to come and go from the physical by choice. We had, unbelievable abilities. I mean, they were natural to us. Now it's like, it seems unbelievable, but it used to be just the norm. And that's the thing. It's like we're so far removed from, who we truly are and what we used to be, that, our memories alone can help to activate it. Mm-hmm. And that's what consciousness can do to our DNA. And the thing is, yes, frequency fences and seals have been put in place when they decided to reseed the human race after, the original Atlantis Lemuria sank, and it, lowered the density of the planet. They came up with a new way to help us to go through this process without destroying ourselves like we did with the original Atlantis. And what happened was the infiltration happened because we were more vulnerable, not having our full DNA intact. And so the seals that were put in were then able to be activated through different root races that would come, and the sharing of codes would happen, which connects to the 12 tribes and the seeding of the 12 tribes, so that we would, through death and reincarnation, activate each other with our different codes from these different root races. But these negative beings came in and prevented us from being able to do this through putting frequency fences in. And that's why we go through that dark night of the soul, to bust through the frequency fences. And that's why, a person on a spiritual path is not having such a blissful time, because it's a war zone of psychic attack and all sorts of stuff. But when we expand beyond these limits that have been put in place, and we understand that the concentrated energy behind it is these programmings that we see in our society, and all the propaganda and all the false flags and all the dumbing down of everything in our culture, we bypass all of it. But, even though we were compromised, we are expanding back into what we used to be on a DNA level, but the experience we're going to have is like nothing we've ever experienced before. And it's that ability to come and go as we please. It's our ability to, basically be creating our reality from, the higher principle of spirit, which has dominion over matter, which enables things to shift really rapidly based on our thought forms, versus the physical matter, dominating, where there's poverty and unwellness and disease and the imbalance and injustices that, feed on that, the creators of the injustices. Mm-hmm. And so we have to just, step up into that level of empowerment and expansion of consciousness to reactivate our DNA. Then we start to wake up to our skills and abilities. We start to share that. And then we're building, everything from the ground up on an organic level that's working with what the planetary body's assisting us with, because the planetary body is coded with the Merkaba star, and it's like a 13-dimensional planet, but it's in lockdown in this 3D as well. But she also, is beyond that, and is kind of allowing this, pocket of energy in this third density to play out as it is for souls to develop, to move on if they can, wake up. And this dark polarity, is there to assist in that, but at the same time, there's no excuse for it. But it ends up being a catalyst for any soul that comes in for this experience to help us advance ourselves, but many lose themselves. But this is not like the divine plan. It's sort of like, nature is wild and there's no real order, but yet there is order because it's the web of life and everything's connected. But it's like constantly correcting itself based on all these things that are taking place. And it comes from ego and duality. When ego came into the picture and duality followed because of free will, you know, in the exploration of polarity, it was like, yeah. So we just have to like align our ego with our higher self and just activate ourselves, and we keep junking ourselves up when we don't treat each other well. And, you know, it comes down to the golden rule and the simplest of principles, but we have to get our morality and integrity back for the shift.
Yeah, completely. For the shift, yeah. So I was going to say, you mentioned a couple of really good things there. One of them was the way that I see people is that that their soul glows, yeah? They glow, they're light beings, but they don't glow light, they glow love. And the fear and hate is like a blanket that is put over people so that they don't glow. And this is coming from above. This is coming from the government. It's coming from the media. It's within that little package we're in, because they can't have us all doing this because it goes against their plan. I was going to ask you, number one, do you agree?
Agree with that? What you just said?
Yeah.
Oh, that's it. I mean, this is what they're trying to prevent. I mean, this is the window period right now, and you know the geoengineering and the chemtrails and everything, you know, that's taking place, even the radiation in the waters, is to completely stifle this natural process, because this process isn't just, I mean, it's a personal expansion into our multidimensional nature because we're stargates, but it's also the time period where the natural stargates open, which happens every 26,000 years. 26,000 years ago, though, like the third stage of the Lucifer rebellion took place, and you know, for people that might get lost in that kind of terminology because it might bring up weird stuff like, oh, it sounds like religion or deity. Yeah. We got to look at it like, no, that was when the negative ego took hold, and all the minions connected to that are just enabling that creative force to reign, and it's the false light of ego. And so a person can seem very bright, but like you said, maybe lack the heart, whereas those with, you know, a glowing heart are blanketed by the veil of the matrix, and so it's a little bit backwards. And so a lot of people go through a lot of hell to allow that heart energy to expand beyond everything getting thrown at it, but you got to walk through those layers and not get distracted or not, you know, medicated or appease it with some sort of lower thing when, you know, we're being called to just face it and transmute it and release it.
That's perfect. You know, we talk. There's an actual host that's on the show before me, and she was involved in military psychotropic attacks.
Right.
And that's just awful. I mean, do you think the military, because we know that they did their remote viewing and remote killing, I think the CIA did it. Do you think that that's something that is maybe still going on? Is that the military involved in doing in trying to bring this down?
Oh, I mean, it's totally, you know, military corporations, banksters. I mean, they own the military. They own the police force in a lot of ways, and they have, you know, different nicknames, you know, behind their back, kind of like laughing at the fact that they so readily serve them, while these people are good-intentioned or well-intentioned people trying to serve humanity, but they're actually, you know, enabling a lot without realizing it. And there's a lot of corruption within those groups, of course, but a lot that aren't corrupted. And that's the problem. You know, we see these things, and it's a mixed bag. And I know about psychotronic weaponry. I was recruited to go to Mars in 2006, and I've been attacked most of my life, so I know it's real, and I can't imagine that something that they've been using is something that they would put an end to. In actual fact, they're probably expanding upon it all the time. And I always see it as an opportunity to, like, you know, become senior to those forces. And it's funny because I became a public speaker, and I notice, you know, I talk fast, and there's certain things that I'm still, like, fine-tuning in my energetic being after all these attacks, and it's like, and people are like, God, you talk so fast and this and that. I'm like, well, I'm also in recovery because I've been zapped by so many, like, invisible weapons. And I, you know, never really concluded that because I always take personal responsibility, like, oh, this must be my stuff. I got to work through it. And I'm like, this is not my stuff. I'm totally being attacked. And I went to a clairvoyant institute. I stumbled upon it when I went to California. And I just ended up going in and getting a reading just to, I don't know, somebody just said, you got to come in here. And I just found it funny because they picked up on all this. They basically were saying, that these attacks were coming, and they were like, synthetic, or like some sort of weaponry. And then when I was recruited to Mars and I realized, what was behind the recruitment, the technologies, things like Looking Glass, things that Dan Bursch talks about, things, about alternatives 1, 2, and 3, which had to do with the establishment of these colonies, ties into things that happened in the Eisenhower administration, and MJ-12 that has their hands on all this alien technology, much of which is mind control, psychotronic weaponry, and all sorts of stuff. I never got, any mind control stuff. I never was put in...
Oh, you still there? Oh, it looks like... Psychotronic weaponry. That was the magic word for today, children. Hopefully, she'll be back with us any second. You know what? This stuff happens to us all the time. In fact, if you're trying to do a DOS attack on me right now, you're being logged. So I hope that you don't. It looks like it might only be her account.
Hi there.
Hey, you're back again. I lost you on on our magic words, psychotronic weaponry.
Oh, I know. And I was just about to wrap it up. So there's both going on, and the thing is, you have to kind of get immersed into these projects when you're a kid to have, the heavy duty sort of compartmentalization, mind control, split personality type thing. That wasn't my thing, but I was targeted to be pulled into this program, and some of the people that they used, which actually, make sense to what they do, to these individuals, trained assassins and ones to do their dirty work. This person that was trying to pull me into the program would get, phone calls and get codes over the phone and then disappear for days. So he was dealing with that sort of thing, didn't know it, but I could see it. But I was dealing with these sort of electronic attacks that kept me very ungrounded, to just sort of weaken me so that I would be easily swayed in. But there was like all sort of different techniques, but I didn't have the mind control. And I checked that out, of course, because, you can't be, when you're dealing with these type of folks, you have to pretty much cover all bases, especially if you're going to speak about it.
Yeah.
And, one person who defected after I, exposed the story said that they couldn't mind control me and that this is, what they attempted to do. And, I got myself back somewhat, but, it just really affected my nervous system. And I think we're dealing with this from smart meters, from cell towers, and basically as a society, we're getting this on maybe lower levels. I got, pretty big ones, and I think a lot of individuals do if they're, specifically targeted. But it was funny because once I exposed the story, all of a sudden it stopped and I started to come back into my body and into the physical world. And I was like, whoa, this is what it's like. Because basically my whole life, I have not, been grounded at all, but not necessarily just because of those reasons. Because like I said, I take full responsibility for my own inner work and the things that I need to do. But you have to build an extra shield, when you're being attacked. But we absolutely can do that. So anybody who's feeling attacked, especially by things like these sort of weapons, there are ways to protect yourself. Because it's funny, because everybody always thinks it's all about inner work and everything's an inner outer reflection. When you're dealing with weapons, it's a little bit different, but I do know I signed up for this to become senior to this, and I kind of keep using that word, I don't really like it anymore, but to kind of rise above it and then to say, hey, this is what we're dealing with, we can do this, and we absolutely can. Sometimes if we look at it through the right eyes, even though it doesn't excuse any of it, we can see it kind of prodding us to force us into this expansion, because the only other option is not so great at all.
Yes, of course. Once again, you mentioned so much stuff, and I wanted to talk about, I just wanted to cover off sightings, abductees. I think you'd already mentioned that, but the sightings, weather manipulation. So I wanted to get through some of that. And before we get to MJ-12, or I certainly alternate 1, 2, and 3, right? That we'll get to that as well. We'll also have a top of the hour break for about 5 minutes, and we'll join back up after that break. Okay, so the first question, what are people seeing in the sky? Now, I know that there was Roswell, there was also pre-Roswell, there was, Huntington Beach, or the Battle of Los Angeles. There was also crashed gear falling all over the place. And some other planes crashed, taking that gear back to the US. What do we, how much, like if you say back in the Roswell era, it was probably alien. But now, if people look in the sky and they legitimately take photos or film something, how much do you reckon is extraterrestrial and how much would be military?
Well, I heard that maybe 60 or 70% are, human pilots.
Yeah.
Reverse engineer craft, and 30% are more than likely extraterrestrial. And, it's interesting because Montauk does tie into these treaties, some of the stuff about ripping a hole open so that these ships could come in, and then have them, begin to communicate with the governments to start to make deals. There's interlinking with all these, different projects. And that's the pieces I've been trying to put together. And it's funny because now I'm like, I've written a lot about it, and it's just like, there's so many different pieces. It's just like so hard to articulate. And I think there's moments of, especially if one has a chance to write, to get it straight. Mm-hmm. But, when we think about Project Paperclip, the different exchanges that went on with Roosevelt, the treaties with Hitler, mm-hmm. The Eisenhower thing came much later, and Roswell and all these different things, numerous amounts of crashes, took place between then and the time that, the treaty with Eisenhower supposedly happened. And not just that, the beginning of the building of underground bases happened around that time as well, in the early 40s. And so people have to understand how early this goes, and that's not even that early compared to the ancient history in the Anunnaki, of course. But when the governments and the treaties really started to happen, started with Roosevelt and Hitler, that were first approached by the Nordics and then the Greys, and they went with the Greys. Both sides did. This is why we see this Illuminati, which includes the Zionists, and the Nazis, but it's like one big mob, of individuals that aren't either on either side. But there's like infighting between those two sides. But these wars are sort of a way to create this battlefield that doesn't make them accountable. And it just sort of puts these leaders in place instead. But people don't realize how much this ties into the extraterrestrial stuff in these treaties. It's all a part of the plan. War and everything we see in the news and in our history books is the facade with all these cosmic wars and these other battles happening behind the scenes. And the crashes and different things are just when they started to get closer and closer to humans, mm-hmm. and when they started to really, use cloning technologies, time travel technologies, and all sorts of things to mess with timelines. And, our world leaders, we don't even know what we're dealing with when you talk about cloning technologies, first off. So it's like, it's so hard because it's like, oh yeah, Obama's a clone, and, Ike might have been a clone or had a clone, and it's like, how do we even know? I mean, they're clones. And so, so all we can really do is do our best with it, but anyone who thinks they might have it all figured out, that's a pretty lofty statement, because there's just like,
I agree.
I mean, I'm doing my best with it, but I always, make sure people know that there's gray areas, but beyond a reasonable doubt, I will put as many pieces together and share as much as I can. It was the Mars recruitment, though, that really helped me to integrate the, alternatives 1, 2, and 3 with the treaties and, the crashes, and where the legitimate extraterrestrials were more prevalent compared to things like the biological entities and the Greys, which are known as future human selves that time travel back to create treaties to keep their race from dying out, which is basically us as humans in the future trying to keep ourselves alive because we went with one of these artificial timelines. And so it's almost like we're dealing with the crossroads right now, with this window period of our potential expansion into our multidimensional nature and all these artificial timelines that are related to these treaties and these ET agendas. It's like so interesting, where it all takes one. And when you're dealing with the Nordics too, which appear very benevolent, and most are, some aren't, but not really by their own will. There's planets, that have dealt with the same sort of attack, that were hybridized, that became the tall whites. The tall whites that work with our governments, are hybridized Nordics that were starting to become Greys but still had the height. Mm-hmm. And so humans are being, modified to become Greys, and that's the future humans that are coming back to get their DNA and get something to help to restore them, because the Greys aren't advanced in a sense. They are intellectually. I mean, their eyes are big, and they've got amazing, abilities on the telepathic and sort of
meditational and telekinesis.
Yeah, and a lot of different abilities. But what has been lost is the capacity to have emotions and heart. And so there are some hybridization programs that are to help them restore that, and that's why there are many that are friendly, because they're starting to feel again and have compassion. And so some will have experiences that are very loving, and that could be that scenario. But then there's other scenarios, because there's like 6 or, God knows, 6 or more different species of greys and 7 or more different species of reptilians. So we're dealing with all different kinds. But the ones that are closest to home with these agendas, and particularly, taking us down the line of, a destroyed planet and the elite going off planet or underground while they thin out the population to create New World Order, that's dealing with these future human selves that time traveled back, that are the ones that are a part of these treaties, that are the ones that are not necessarily the legit ETs, which are different. And that's what I think those crafts are more of what we're seeing today. There were a lot more benevolent crafts that were more, giving people rides in ships all the time, and I think that's still happening, but it's far less because they're in a war zone. I mean, we're dealing with cosmic battles here, and it's between, some of these races. And there's guardian races and other races that are coming to help that aren't a part of these wars, but we're completely caught in the middle. And I know, maybe a lot of people hearing this understand that, so I don't, but I think, it might be a perspective for some that it's a new way to look at it, because in actual fact, it's the choices we make today that determine where we as individuals go,
If we all had the opportunity to be able to go back in time and fix something that was monumentally wrong in our own life, it may be that we would choose that. And I appreciate how complex it is to say that for the Greys to be coming back in time to fix the fault that they made, and that this is the time period in which that would be done. So it means that we're about to make a choice or side with the wrong side, or whatever it is that we're about to do, or be in the position to become affected by something, that it's now is the time. And I really like that part about it. What I wanted to do was talk about the treaties. Now, pre-World War II, Laura, the US and Germany Germany had entered into a treaty whereby they were getting mind control, being taught handed the booklet, and this was I call this the Pleiadians versus the Greys time in our history. Is this when it started? Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. No, I'm so glad you just said all that.
It joins Paperclip. Yeah, this is how and the results of it.
Right, and that's the thing, is the Nordics approached, Hitler and, Roosevelt first. I mean, obviously there's benevolent forces that don't want any of this. They want us all to get along and to get rid of these weapons. And then the Greys get involved, and through, manipulation and the fact that Aleister Crowley was involved, and this is through a lot of deep research with people I really, trust, resources that are, really strong with whistleblowers backing it up, and even people I've given sessions to that remember that time in history. So I'm not saying this lightly. I didn't just Google this one day and it's just from one article. So
by the way, you've got such a friendly audience with us.
Yay!
That it's great. Just please continue.
Oh, cool! I love that. That's great. So when the Greys approached, then we're dealing with that whole concept of kind of bribery and just, this is how we can make it worth your while. And when we're dealing with negative ego type stuff, which we could call the Lucifer Rebellion, but to help us take accountability or take responsibility, we got to look at where we enable it. So that's why I say negative ego, because that's really what the agenda is. It's very self-serving. And Churchill and Aleister Crowley and Hitler were the first 3 that were relating to the Greys and sort of backed out of the connection with the Nordics. And that the Crowley connection goes all the way back to Atlantis and what got passed to him, the information that got passed to him, which gave him all the tools he needed to understand the occult side of things, to be able to harness energy and siphon energy. And then different technologies have been put in place. 26,000 years ago, technologies were put in place, one called the Nephilim reversal grid, that has to do with, how to keep us from being able to unify. So that's where it really originated with these technologies, and the rebellion from the Nephilim that didn't want to heal their genetic lines because they wanted to maintain control. And so that's when a lot of imposters showed up and used biblical names and basically distorted religion and distorted how we develop spiritually, so that we would be stunted at this time. We would be lost in religious BS and New Age BS, and miss the mark, which has to do with the divine blueprint we came in with and the DNA potential that we have to expand and to be very self-reliant, but not self-serving, but more about understanding the concept of, oneness, which is diversity and harmony, not one world order, right? Diversity and harmony is that we're all different, but we're from one source. Let's get along. And so the Greys and Crowley and all that, ended up becoming this Illuminati sort of cultish, satanic, ritualistic type thing, which is also where we hear about the reptilians. And so, that leads to just, these great treaties and the ones that got caught into those agendas. Some are trying to help us, but some are still under their control. And this is where we have to realize that those time traveling back, some are here to restore.
Ooh. It looks like we might have lost her again. My goodness, I'll tell you, it's not my internet connection. Hang on a second.
Okay, I'm back.
Hey, you're back again. Awesome. It's, you know what? I've got a detection system on my connection here, and I've been flung off air a couple of times when we start talking about sensitive stuff. I've got the IP addresses of all the people throwing me off air too, so you just better... They know who they are.
Yeah, so I guess just to wrap up that point was, when we're dealing with the ones time traveling back, there are ones that really do want to rehabilitate themselves and work with us, and we're going to, want to embrace all sorts of different beings, all sorts of species. Mm-hmm. But the whole point is we have to be cooperative. We have to be looking out for one another, not these control agendas, because there's others that are time traveling back that are still immersed in the reptilian agenda, and there's good reptilians too, but the one that's really out for this new world order. And that history is really deep, and it goes into, the Black Suns and the Draco stuff and just early stuff in our galactic history that led to the explosion of planets that's now our asteroid belt. And the whole thing about that, connects then to the mythologies of the goddess and the asteroid belt. Of course, the asteroids that are closest to us are like Vesta, Chiron, the wounded healer, Athena, and all these different archetypes that we are learning to integrate again to become whole, to heal those fragmented parts that have kept us, from being able to advance into our multidimensional nature. And of course, it is also about the masculine and the Christ consciousness. But all that terminology has been somewhat ruined. So
back with Dave and Mecky's Shiny Side Out on freedomslips.com. That's right, the number one, as Hawk said, listener-supported talk radio on the net. Since it is listener-funded radio, and you like what you hear, as Hawk, the station owner, said, please go to freedomslips.com and push the donate button on the site support page. It's on the left in the chat room. Your donation is greatly appreciated. It helps run this station. As he says, as we all say, it's very important. Yes, help support our airtime. Not anyone else's, not any other host. I'm kidding. I'd like to say hello to all the new listeners we have today. Thank you so much. We're glad you're on board. Please check out our archives and all our previous shows if you're interested in the topic we're talking about today. You know that it links to all the other topics. This is show number 118. That's more than 2 years' worth, guys. Laura Eisenhower, great-granddaughter of Dwight D. Eisenhower, is on the line with us. And we are halfway through the show. Please, if you're just tuning in now, jump on YouTube maybe tomorrow or the next day and pick it up from where you missed the original first half. It's going to be awesome. Oh, boy, what a show. So there's no Mecky, everyone, if you're wondering where Mecky is. He's off and about. He's in a different country with no internet. If I go on holidays and I'm without my internet for like 5 minutes, I don't know, I start getting nervous. I don't know what to do with myself. I'm kidding. I like to relax. And usually my partner says, I thought you said it was a holiday without the computer, and there I am sitting on my laptop. I'd like to remind everyone what we're talking about today. And that is, I think, every single thing that I've ever wanted to talk about with Laura since I've been following her interviews all around everywhere with everybody else. And I just had to talk to her myself because whilst the information is great, you know what, she's a wealth of info. She's been putting this all together. She's on the talk circuit. She's talking about all this stuff all the time. And there's no better person than the actual person who's bringing the information to you. So welcome back aboard. Laura, thank you so much for holding on during the break.
Oh, I'm here. Thanks.
Now, before the break, we were talking about the treaties between the Greys, the Palladians, anyone else, any other parties, and our governments of the world at the time. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to ask you, if one country is making a treaty for an exchange of information, and another one, say Germany and the US, are making treaties, are they getting the same info? And what would then be the result of World War II having, as everyone knows, Project Paperclip?
Yeah, it's all like really complex. I mean, I think that's what just the core body of the Illuminati is kind of, connected to just, the main agenda of, I guess, the strongest, like lower ET service to self type beings. And when that branches out beyond it, all the different things that it touches, different groups are sort of addressed different ways, because the Nazis had the mind control technology and had the sort of thing that Paperclip brought in, but the treaty with Roosevelt, that technology was different, and so that technology had more to do with anti-gravity devices, free energy, and medical technology, and it was basically an exchange for the Greys to infiltrate human societies on different levels. That was the agreement, that for these technologies, you let us do this. And so they said yes. For the Nazis, like I said, it was for trauma-based mind control technology, amongst other things. That's the one that I tend to focus on as being the major difference there. But when Project Paperclip came into the U.S., why did that happen so easily? Well, it just so happens that the Office of Strategic Studies, the Office of Strategic Services, had been active with Project Paperclip for about 3 months before Truman, gave the order and said it was okay. And if you look into the Office of Strategic Services, or the OSS, there was a Nazi member there. And basically they resorted to whitewashing the histories of the Nazis and creating new identities. And this is what ended up happening before Truman had his eyes set on it. So he had no real idea. And so it was all sort of pre-planned. And so they ended up coming over. And in the eyes of the more surface American government, it was seeming to be harmless. But in the more shadow government, it was like set up that way for infiltration. And that's when, they started to get involved in certain projects. They started to infiltrate defense agencies. I believe, Montauk got, majorly infiltrated by that. I'm not quite sure, where that all entered the picture and what the benevolent forces were doing with those projects. But I know that, the time travel technology came from, the beings from Sirius B, and it just ended up getting out of control because it's like handing a kid a toy. And then when it got out of control, the beings from Sirius A tried to do something about it because they knew they had a relationship with them, and then came in, and a lot of the grid workers ended up coming in. So when we hear about people that are benevolent Syrians that are helping us, they're the grid workers. They're the ones that are trying to help the, grids of Gaia sort of release herself from these technologies. So Project Paperclip, though, was where these, scientists and doctors, got involved, and, basically the Bilderbergs, the Council of Foreign Relations, and all these, bankster types, ended up being the MJ-12 group, and they ended up taking all the technologies. So as they took all the technologies, then you're dealing with Paperclip. Now you've got corruption on both sides, and that's where the infighting is. And so you've got kind of like a little bit of that and a little bit of collaboration. But it's all kind of within that bubble. But like I said before, on a human level, everybody's being played. And I guess later on in the game, they decided to fully join forces because it was too much for them to be divided. And now it's like they're just more functioning as one. And that's just sort of like been taking place slowly. And this is where these two treaties sort of combined, where, the free energy, the medical technology, and the mind control and all these different underground bases, have certain factions of them that utilize both. And so when we look at things like Project Pegasus and the things connected to Alternative 3 and the things connected to the time that Eisenhower was approached and these sort of agendas were starting to be implemented, they were in the hands of advisors that were presenting themselves as being humanitarian that at that time weren't fully known as being, a part of the shadow government. I mean, imagine, there's so much going on with the Nazis and the Jews and the Germans and those that were caught in the middle and just, the innocent lives that were taken and the ones that were fighting the wars that didn't know what side was what and what was up from down, that were just trying to serve their country. And then these leaders that were tasked to do things, through very manipulative.
Oh, today's word was manipulative. Wow. Poor Laura. You know what? I think people are all over this. And, I struggle there. She's dropped off. I struggle to see just how... Oh, I think she might be back again.
I am.
Yeah, great, awesome. We'll just keep rolling through all of this. It doesn't, it doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
Okay, so Paperclip joined like mind control and alloys and anti-gravity and those things together for probably either a greater bad or whatever it is. Do you think those treaties then joined together? Because I've heard, and I think I understand through my own experience, that the Greys were given access to the world's people for whatever it is that they do. I feel it's more like we're lab rats of just being tested and done.
And that's what the deal was for those technologies. With the American government originating with Roosevelt, it was for infiltration on society at all levels.
Yeah.
The more original ones that were basically when Hitler was first approached, which was before Roosevelt. Crowley, Hitler, and Churchill had already decided that they could abduct a certain number of individuals, and they didn't actually care about the numbers, and it really got out of control even back then. And then it got to the next level because whistleblowers have confirmed, and this is from more than one, that these treaties are renewed every 10 years. So the first one was in, 1934. The next one was in 1944, and then there was one in 1954, and then actually has been reported that there was one in 1964. The one with Ike, of course, was 1954. So the one with Roosevelt was 34, and then in 44, I guess that would make it during, Truman's time, and I'm not quite sure, how that one, played out necessarily, but it's definitely been confirmed that they're renewed every 10 years. So each time it's renewed, you're dealing with a different level of infiltration. And so, if you think about one side having certain technologies that made the deal, for abductions, and another side making a deal which included abductions, you got both scenarios, perhaps different experiences on both ends, and then infiltration to these defense departments from the other side, which I guess would be like moles showing up and gaining intel and passing that intel to others. Then all of a sudden, these things start to morph into, one agenda, based on how they're able to get their hands on all this stuff. And I would say that the most focal point of all of it, is the Bilderbergs and the Council of, Foreign Relations and, where the Rothschilds and, where these, 13 families are involved. But the thing is, it's different with them because they're the ones dealing with the trauma-based mind control to be possessed by these entities. And so we can look at the characters all we want, but we have to understand that most of them aren't even in possession of themselves. Because the way these beings work is to infiltrate through possessing the ones that they want to act as the government and leaders, even shadow government leaders. Now it's, not surface government anymore. Now I think we're dealing with clone presidents. I mean, now I think that even the surface government's completely taken over. And the last president was Kennedy, who actually had some level of sanity, and maybe, Reagan here and there, and Carter, I don't know. But I know Ford was, anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But, so I think, all these things started to just join in with each other, and then you're dealing with, different treaties amongst different individuals that have their hands on these technologies that are basically, pawns of these, beings, and it becomes one thing, but with many branches. And so the 13 families look to be like the Illuminati, but there's a core sort of the ringleaders and the overlords that are running the main show with all these different branches that are just completely kind of like under their control. And so when you look at like, Aaron Green Hicks and, different whistleblowers that are a part of the Illuminati families that have broken out of their programming, that are super soldiers or that have been, mind controlled their whole lives, that are a part of these families, and you look into these family members, most are monarch slaves or most were sold into becoming monarch slaves by their very parents. This sort of, these families are just on a multi-generational level passing down this level of abuse to keep this possession alive, which goes back way further than these treaties. These treaties are just how to take care of the surface level now, which is the surface government, which is why these different projects have the presidents involved. I mean, Andy Bashago, my colleague, who talks a lot about Mars and the jump rooms and teleportation to Mars, said that he was in a Mars training program with Obama. And the presidency is now in the control of the CIA. It's now a CIA project, and presidents are now groomed, and they are instructed and controlled to be a certain way to handle these sort of times, which wasn't the case with our American government, before.
Of the past.
Yeah, of the past.
Yeah,
and the treaty with Roosevelt, I think, was the beginning of where this infiltration took place, and Eisenhower was next in line, woke up to it, and then warned us about the military-industrial complex. But he had 8 heart attacks, and he's dealing with these treaties, and he's just like, when you see the video that Richard Dolan did with Anonymous, I mean, he wanted to invade Area 51 and realize what was going on, and so this is the thing with compartmentalism and some of these treaties, too. It's like things are presented in a way that's very manipulative. But then when you look under the manipulation, which is the different type of onion and peeling the layers, then one wakes up and realizes, like, oh, my gosh, But the bad part is when you know what you're doing, some of those treaties with Churchill and Hitler and Roosevelt knew very well that all these beings would be abducted. When it came to Eisenhower, they didn't even consider it treaties anymore. They called it a surrender. At least 5 or 6 of the whistleblowers said, this was a surrender. They had weapons that we didn't have any way to defend ourselves, and infiltration had already taken place. These 3-letter organizations were already in place. The sad part is that the Nordics showed up first, and if everything had gone along with the Nordics, maybe something could have been done. But the thing is, they never were able to reach an agreement with the Nordics. The Nordics weren't turned away. It's just they hadn't reached an agreement, and a few days later when the Greys showed up. And so it was all like this big entanglement, and then, the nuclear energy and the testing of bombs and, all this crazy stuff with the Cold War. I mean, it was just like a rat's nest of tanglements that we can't even fully comprehend. And that's where the core ringleaders know what's going on, and they weaken people. And that's what the weaponry does. It weakens people, and the mind control controls people. So if you're not a part of the Illuminati and you're not getting mind controlled, you're getting zapped with the weaponry, or you're being manipulated and zapped. And the manipulation for the ones that aren't a part of the Illuminati, like the Eisenhower family is not Illuminati, is a certain level of manipulation that makes you feel like you're helping the human race.
Yeah.
And they did that to me. They said, if you go to Mars, you're helping the human race, and I was like, okay, this is where maybe the warning of the military-industrial complex, I need to dig real deep because something doesn't feel right at all, because this is all like cloak and dagger, cat and mouse. Like, if this was benevolent, this wouldn't be so embroiled in mind, in all this crazy stuff and black ops and, so I had to expose it. Even if it was a good idea to go to Mars to protect the human genome, we got to get stuff in order. We got to realize the game. And I was willing to take that risk. And plus, I'm here to just be personally free, and help humanity be free and to help us rise above it. That is a mission I was born with. So, it really just comes down to, just the personal choices we're making. But the thing is, we're dealing with 2 different things, the Illuminati and those that are on the other side of it. And the big one is patriotic programming, which is what our armies and our police force and the military and, world leaders, the ones like maybe Truman and Eisenhower, that level of manipulation where, and a lot of the people that are part of these agendas that think that they're heroes, and the ones that might be flying the planes and thinking they're helping with global warming that don't realize they're poisoning all of us, and that, there's nanoparticles in those chemtrails. A lot of the programming and manipulation has to do with making people feel like they're heroes when in actual fact they're enabling these dark agendas. Perfect example is Phil Schneider, who was helping, build these deep underground military bases, and then found out, he was duped, and they told him he was doing something good, that was benefiting us, and realized that, nope, that's not the case. And that's why there's so many whistleblowers. There's so many whistleblowers, and luckily I don't know what I consider myself, but, luckily we're not being killed off as easy. But, I mean, mine is a different type. I've been labeled that. I don't like labels, but I guess you got to call yourself something.
Well, I'd suggest to you that you don't call yourself a whistleblower. because we've seen an unprecedented amount of whistleblower deaths. So please don't ever do that.
Oh, no, I mean, it was just because I exposed the Mars thing, and so that name was going around, and I'm like, I don't know, I'm just me. I'm just doing my path.
Good. Okay, so, I think I was on a roll then for a second. Oh, that's right. So the people who are made to feel like heroes are those ones. If you ever put I've got kids. If you put a baby into a fenced area where they can't hurt themselves, what you're doing is you're giving that individual a ton of freedom, but it's caged. And this is the kind of thing that they do. They say, okay, here's your parameters. You can go and do this, and you've got all the flexibility from what you've been contained within to go and do that thing. And it empowers a person. They can get out there and they can do their thing and they can feel good about it. But ultimately it's not always the best outcome. Yeah.
Right, and that's the thing with everything in the media and all the distractions and all the addictions, and they don't even name most of the things that people are addicted to. It's so glamorized and it's so promoted that people don't even consider it like being locked into something unhealthy. Things that are just keeping us in a lower consciousness, that are keeping us out of integrity, that are causing just really negative partnerships, relationships, and the misuse of energy. And it's like it's all promoted, but they siphon that energy away from us and use it as a weapon against us. They use our free energy as a weapon against us by us buying into all this crap that we keep feeding into and enjoying because it feels good. But, the thing is, once you start to look into it and you go deeper, you realize it's empty because, first of all, we don't die with, a ton of money. We don't die with all these distractions. We die with our soul. We need to develop ourselves spiritually, and we're not encouraged to do that. And the ones that are the leaders out there that are trying to promote it are satanic, because the Vatican, look at that, all religion. And even like a lot of the guru types that are promoted aren't necessarily, completely clean or pure. And it's just the game. And basically, if you're disempowered, you're going to fall into that pit. If you know who you are and what you're made of and what your potential is, you're going to, be fine and probably be on the right timeline. And this is the crossroads. We're at Grand Central Station right now. What train are you going to choose? And the thing is, when we choose the right thing, we can then, begin to unify and look to each other. But yeah, it's like all that propaganda stuff. And so when people start to look more holistically and start to focus on their own healing, that's the spiritual path. But that's when they hit the frequency fences, which is when the psychic attacks come in. And that's a certain initiation a person has to go through to really expand. And I'm sure most people go through it. And if they're able to, skip it all together, then you might want to just make sure that you're doing the real stuff. And I'm not saying it has to be painful and difficult, but there is a lot of going through a lot of death and rebirth processes in your own ego to really get to the core truth of who you are. And it's not very comfortable. So if people are having a very easy, fluffy spiritual path, you might want to make sure that you're not, in some level of distraction. But, you might be exactly where you need to be. You might have done all that in a past life, but it's up for the individual. And, life gives us what we need. And I'm an astrologer, and that's kind of how I use astrology as a tool, because we all signed up for different experiences. And, we get exactly what we need to develop ourselves. But the thing that we can't lose is our sensitivity to it. It's when we're blocked from being able to feel that we, lose our ability to work with the planets and work with what's organic and work with the natural lessons that come from cosmic law and natural law. When we're dumbed down and we don't have emotion or feelings, then we're locked into this other thing that, gives us all these false pleasures that keep us from what we really need to focus on. And then we're zombies. We don't pay attention. And every time we hit that frequency fence and we get uncomfortable, we go on meds or we drink or we go for the next addiction, and we avoid the spiritual growth because, we're not taught to embrace our power or our own darkness. We're taught to give that to a spiritual person to tell us we're okay. And it's just like we have to just face ourselves. And as uncomfortable as it might be, it's where our liberation's at. And that's what I write about a lot and share a lot. I mean, the labyrinth and going into just the hell zones and initiating myself. And we have to do this as a human race, and a lot of us are doing it. And I know that you are, and everybody is in our own ways. It's going to maybe sound different and look different. But, we have to go through certain things to get to the other side. Yeah. And it depends who we are.
Completely. Absolutely, completely. And and everyone's journey is different from wherever their starting point is. And you're right to say that, if you may feel as though you've already done it, I think the only person to judge you is you, but it's the core of you that has to judge the rest of you, and I think that's really tough to, if someone held a mirror to you, and they're telepathic. I make an argument, Laura, that if you were in a room full of telepaths, and they could read your mind, and they were given all of your memories, would they think you were a nice person?
Are you asking me?
No, not in particular. I'm not judging you.
Oh, right.
This is the rhetorical question. So,
totally.
If you could survive that, then I think you're doing good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, if you want to do nothing else but in your whole life is be able to survive a room of telepaths, not by blocking them, but by opening everything you know about everything to them, and to see how you fared. That's the way I've gone about my life. That's the only way I can do it. Can you hear me, Laura? Oh, cut off again. Huh. Just pop a message in when you can hear me if you can. Yeah. Not having a great day with this Skype today. I don't believe it's Skype. It looks like it might be at her end, but we'll keep going. I've got a lot of really good topics to come up in the last half an hour, so stay with me, everyone. They say it's children and animals you shouldn't work with, but I believe it's also technology.
I'm back.
Hey, you're back again. I just gave the example of not working with children or animals, but I mean including technology in that as well.
Right. I think I missed it a little bit before that, but the last thing you said was about the telepaths, and and like children and kids, and this is the thing though, it's like transparency. That's what we're moving into when we advance ourselves. We don't just we awaken spiritual abilities based on our ability also to clear all the crap away. Mm-hmm. We can't do it if we're treating others terribly and ourselves. We have clogged chakras. We our DNA is somewhat stunted. But when we clear all this, and when, we enable ourselves to just do what's necessary to become a better person, and be honest with ourselves, and we clear all that stuff, we expand, we embrace our, we get in touch with our spiritual abilities, and you can't get there unless you do that. But because of what happened in our ancient history, there's a lot of high dimensional beings that had fallen that can access higher dimensional energies and manipulate them. And so, that's why there's a lot of attack even in those higher planes, but there's some, of course, they can't access at all. Mm-hmm. But in that, clearing, that's why, a person has to be very careful of the gatekeeper types, or the types of individuals that have psychic abilities but misuse them. Mm-hmm. So when you said that, I knew that you were talking about the ones that are very, very clear and that can see everything, and that probably, aren't misusing, the third eye, mm-hmm. to manipulate. That's a great place to be, is when you can be transparent and you have nothing to hide. And I absolutely agree, and I love that you said that. But it just reminded me of the fact, too, that, you can have pretty advanced abilities and misuse them, but they also keep you from some of the higher abilities and our galactic chakras that we're starting to move into as we move out of this density. And that's what they're afraid of, and that's why that's where the frequency fence comes in, because mm-hmm. they have the third eye stuff, they can manipulate, and they can have these higher abilities. And, they can, do things, and they have occult knowledge, and we can reach that place. But when we reach a little bit higher than that, that's when they recognize that we're leaving that fence, or that, the thing around the kid, that cage. Mm-hmm. And that's when they start saying, no, you can't go past that, because that's where they aren't able to go, and that's where they start to lose it, because this is why they've attacked us. This is why we've been targeted, because we have abilities that they can't access. They traded in their potential to do that, to be able to maintain control. Mm-hmm. And they're doing everything in their power to keep us from being able to achieve this, because they need us to feed on, And so If we advance beyond them, that's why they never could go with these positive agendas, because that threatens them too much. But they can incarnate into these higher lines if they wanted to and redeem themselves, but they don't allow any higher dimensional beings to come into their race lines, and they traded in their 12-strand DNA a long time ago so that they could remain in control of this matrix. And so this is why these times are so profound. And we got to say this is exciting, because doing the inner work doesn't have to be a pain. You can make it real fun, because this is the ultimate weapon against them, is to keep advancing yourself, keep expanding, keep opening the heart. and then to be so transparent that you have nothing to hide. And so what about surveillance if you have nothing to hide? And so what if you're targeted? And so what if they even kill you? Because we're moving into territory where the veil is being lifted between life and death. Enough with being afraid of death, because that's a control agenda. Death is not really what we're made of, because this has been introduced. Death was not always the case. We used to be able to come and go as we pleased. So having death control us and having survival stuff come up all the time over death is how they control us. So when I dropped the fear of death, I was able to get out of all these things that they were trying to, keep me in. Because I was just like, well, what's the worst case scenario? What, they kill me? I'm like, so what? I'm like, what's so big about death? I'm like, actually, that sounds pretty nice someday.
We've spoken a lot about immortality, and I'll get to that in a second. Yeah, on our show in previous, we did a whole 2 hours just on immortality on its own. But I wanted to just so I can cut this one off. It's done. Abductees. I have to say, what's in store for our abductees? One of my guesses is that there's some upgrades. Yeah, or as another example, if I say that room full of telepaths again, if you don't speak at all and you suddenly confronted with people that are using their mouth to make words, you might have a go. Yeah. So if you're in a room full of telepaths and you may not have realized that all humans have the ability, that you can do it, and you hear that, then you might have a go, you might learn it, you might become good at it. One of the things is that I always question is, what's in store for the abductees?
Well, I think it depends what scenario. I mean, I think what's in store is, I know for some people, it's so different across the board. And, me working with clients, it never ceases to amaze me how many different types of experiences people have. And some, has to do with advancing them and, helping them on some level, I'm sure, even though it doesn't maybe seem that way. And I'm not one to say. I always leave it up to the individual, because it's about empowerment, of course. And even if that person's not totally correct, we're here to fall on our face and get back up again. Yeah. Even if, there's chipping involved, because, nothing can block spirit, because that's going to win through in the end. But I think what's in store for abductees, obviously they've been targeted because they have special gifts and abilities, and certain blood types, maybe certain DNA, they're looking for to help to rehabilitate, themselves. So then some are, creating hybrids and being implanted so that they can birth, ET hybrid children to be a part of the human race. And that, can be like, wow, an expansion of the star family, because, our original DNA had all sorts of extraterrestrial genetics. We are made of extraterrestrial energies. We're made of everything in the cosmos. We're just working with different pieces of ourselves, fragments of ourselves, until we can become whole again. So I think the future for abductees is to recognize, not to recognize because there's no lesson that I have for anybody, but I think for all of us to recognize, okay, what's going on right now? What are all the different scenarios? And what are people going through? And how can we work with this to create the most positive outcome? For abductees particularly, I think the outcome is that, they played a particular role, and it can be something that we can expand upon and make right. But we have to have our consciousness intact to be able to steer these things in the right direction, because it doesn't matter what the outward form is, what the gift and ability is, what the DNA is, what the race is, what the species is, what the hybrid is. If the consciousness is intact, everything else on the outside is fine. If the heart's in place, if there's unity consciousness, if there's respect for other life forms, then it doesn't matter, what you are, because, you're respecting other life forms and their free will and what needs to take place. It's when you start to mess with people's free will in the bigger picture that it starts to, be a big deal, because with certain abductees, it's an agreement. That might be their star family from another, time and space. They might be working with that ET race for a reason. They might be creating babies for a reason, and they have an agreement. So we can't say that person's free will is violated necessarily if we don't understand their soul contracts. Okay. That's why I use astrology to understand that. So I think at the end of the day, each individual needs to look at the bigger picture of what it really means for them. And then we need to listen to those people and take them seriously as a humanity, and stop with the, secrecy, stop with the projection, stop with the, oh, you're crazy, or guard yourself and have boundaries with those type of people, and don't let them bring you down anymore. I'm trying real hard to get those people away from me with the stuff that I share. And let's just all, put these stories together, and then, and start to, take out the negative elements and start to look at the beauty of what, remains, which is like, wow, we're multidimensional beings in a multidimensional cosmos. There's all kinds of beings and species. And even the most negative experiences and the worst kind of abductions, for those types, they get to, really learn how to develop themselves so that those beings can't use them anymore. And for the ones that are working with the good, then they have a lot to show us and to remind us of. And they might be making major improvements to the world as we know it because of these things from the dark side that have, ruined our resources in Mother Earth and have polluted and, basically are trying to control the weather. I know I'm kind of jumping around because it's kind of late on my end.
It's
but
okay.
The whole point is, no, God, I love being on. Thank you for having me. But we have a rehabilitation process in front of us. There's a lot of damage that's happened to the resources on our planet and our physical bodies. So, those that have been dealing with the worst are going to learn to expand beyond all of that. Those that are, working with us are going to help us to rehabilitate this planet. And if we can't rehabilitate this planet, we can move into higher dimensional energies. The ones that went underground and off planet that might have become the Greys might have lost connection with their emotions and their heart energy, and like we talked about, are gathering DNA to help restore that. Then there's the underground scenario and the off-planet scenario that has nothing to do with becoming Greys, because we know there's a lot of off-planet races that are higher dimensional beings, like under Shasta and Talos and, Agartha and the Agartha network. So we can still go underground and still advance ourselves and go off-planet. So these are the free will choices we have. And so if you're dealing with abductions, you're dealing with either the benevolent or not so benevolent, but no matter how no matter how malevolent of a being you're dealing with, that is a catalyst for growth. If you're dealing with the benevolent, then that's a way shower. That's an opportunity to be a guide to humanity. So no matter how bad it gets, look at it as a catalyst. No matter how good it gets, look at it as a gift to be shared. I've dealt with some very, very dark individuals and beings, and I have to say it only made me stronger, and I guess that's the point I have to make.
Oh, awesome. Do you mentioned DNA. I was going to ask you because according to the ancient stories from around the world, the pre-flood stories from all around the world, in all the different countries, our research has shown that they seem to have mentioned that immortality was sort of taken away from our DNA, that in some way, shape or form, that an adjustment to our DNA would bring that back. In conjunction to that, because you've mentioned underground bases quite a lot of times, and from what I can understand, there's like 4,000 underground bases around the world. We're talking about military or partnership bases. So tell me what you know.
About the different genetic things going on in underground bases?
Yeah, or just about the bases themselves. It doesn't really matter.
Well, I mean, there's about 4,000 worldwide, supposedly, and maybe 134 in America. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of experimentations going on for sure. From what I know, there's different levels going on. And, okay, for example, like Dulce. If you hear about
Dulce,
the Dulce
New
Force,
Mexico, yeah.
Dulce, New Mexico, there's one I know about. When you deal with the lowest of levels, you're dealing with, extraterrestrials that live underground, and they work with humans. And as you go up in these levels, you're dealing with, scientists working with extraterrestrials. You're dealing also with humans that are a part of these genetic experiments that might not have any access to anything at all, but they're just in the middle of all this. Then you're dealing with workers that have no ability to even meet the ETs, but some have stumbled upon them that have been whistleblowers that have spoken about it. Mm-hmm. And some of these things are horrific, that go on there. Absolutely horrific. So much genetic manipulation. You hear about chimeras, human and DNA being mixed. And we have to understand that, they're playing Frankenstein, and, souls do come into these bodies, and they feel very tortured. There's billions of souls that want to come into human bodies, so I guess certain souls decide to maybe do this just to have a chance to just develop themselves, because there's so many trapped souls that maybe they just agreed to get in there. But the thing is, they're obviously suffering. And so there's all sorts of horrific things going on. The amount of torture that goes on when you hear about the darker underground bases is beyond anything I could even, talk about right now, but I can. But the best place to find out about it, I think, is the super soldier programs, because they really, were trained in these underground bases and saw horrific things, and that was a part of their training, to be exposed to such horrific, traumatic events and things happening to the people around them and the children around them, so that they would basically have their personality split. This all happens in underground bases. The creation of super soldiers, probably the experimentation with certain technologies that could actually cure cancer and help us are worked with, maybe to benefit the elite, because they have all sorts of projects and programs to benefit them in the long run. When you look at a movie like The Hunger Games, look at how, part of humanity is, enslaved, and the rest is benefiting from all these technologies and using them for their own good. So you've got those that are experimenting with technologies that could actually save humanity. They're using, teleportation and time travel that could, feed the hungry. Mm-hmm. They've got weather modification that could actually, help droughts and people get food. I mean, so obviously they have their hands on all this stuff, and it's hidden, and it's in underground bases, and it's all to benefit the elite and to screw over the ones that are, either trying to stop this or don't even know what game is being played, that are just wandering along that get taken. So I don't know about benevolent underground bases other than the ones that are underground cities.
Wow, once again, lost audio with Laura. That's okay, because everything she's saying is 100% positive. We're across all of this already. Our audience loves it. This is where we are. We already know it. The next question, when Laura's back, is going to be I want to focus in on the weather manipulation and the spraying. All right, so that's where we're going to be. So, Laura, are you back with me?
Yeah, I am.
Fantastic. We only lost you there. It trailed off at the end there, but you mentioned something really important: that weather manipulation and spraying. I was going to ask you a question, and I don't want it to be a loaded question, because, I believe that at some point, if you start to manipulate the weather, if I trend this out, if you've got a natural system and you start playing with it, at some point you're going to it's going to require that you play with it all the time to keep it stable. It's going to cause an instability to be able to make it stable, and then it's going to be completely unstable, and it requires 100% manipulation. And this is this combined with chemtrail spraying or spraying of other things?
Well, the chemtrails and HARP are completely connected, and it's all connected to weather modification. And also the chemtrails have nanoparticles that get into us, and then we're linked into sort of this artificial system. And the ET, certain races want this. And I mean, sometimes I say ET when I shouldn't, because I don't consider them extraterrestrial.
They're visitors to me.
Yeah, and we dealt with an invasion a long time ago, and so can we? I mean, we're all kind of from other star systems too, so it's kind of a weird word at this point to me. We're just what we are. But just real quick about just the experimentations in the underground bases too, because you mentioned immortality.
Yeah.
Immortality being taken away was done when we were created as a slave race. That was the Anunnaki.
That's right.
But as far as like what goes on in the underground bases, I mean, it's still, we've already gotten our DNA messed with. There's already technologies that have been put in place, underground underground at sacred sites, that are affecting certain ley lines to keep us from being able to heal.
Yeah.
So that, because we can get our immortality back, but they have things set in place to make that difficult. And that's where all this intrusion of these, smart meters and cell towers and chemtrails come in. So it's all connected to that. So when the Anunnaki came and messed with our DNA to create a slave race, and these technologies were put in place to keep us from being able to heal from that, because spirit can heal from anything, but if we're divided and we're being blasted with all sorts of things to keep us in disharmony and to keep us at battle with each other, not to mention all the false flags that keep us in fear and keep us like with historical resentments, like your ancestors did this to my ancestors, when really it's all a game, then we get to the chemtrails, because now we're starting to wake up and start to forgive each other. Oh no, but you guys can't do that. Let's bombard you with weather modification now, because basically, for everything that we could actually solve comes another insult, and we got to solve this one now. And it has to do with, I think the most pressing thing is weather modification and geoengineering, and how these nanoparticles are getting into us, and how it's trying to create an antenna to this artificial intelligence system. And I believe that, you have to buy into the programming for it to even work, because you can't control an already conscious being. But if you buy into the game that's being played, then you're susceptible to all this geoengineering and weather modification stuff. So anybody who's awake, basically we're witnessing something. We're not, I feel, going to be stuck in this, but I feel, and I believe, and I almost know, and I actually, between me and myself, I absolutely know, 100%, but I can't speak for everybody, that we're here to help others see the light and wake up within this. And once you do that, we're not the effect of it anymore, because we start to expand, and in the higher dimensional energies we can handle all this because we can transmute it, and the physics are different. But if we're in 3D mentality and we're thinking through a 3D mind and we have lower emotions and we treat each other on a lower level, we're absorbing this stuff, and it's soaking right in, because we have no ability to process it because we don't have a higher vibration running in our body. We're completely cut off from source. We're completely cut off from our higher self and our own, personal development. And so it all links into the Anunnaki. They're a part of the Illuminati. The faction of the Anunnaki that plays into the Dracos, of course. And then there's positive factions of the Anunnaki and aspects of it that have tried to help us. And they play a part in the restoration of our DNA through understanding the Earth cycles, the Venus transits, which the Mayans understood, how, we're basically going through all this. And it's about sharing codes and Kundalini activation, and the Venus transits are hugely important because this is all about the window period, and this is why I talk about the divine feminine, not because I'm not a feminist. It has nothing to do with women should, fight war. No, not 3D mentality, feminine energy. We're talking just Gaia, cosmos, feminine birthing, new realities and creativity, and men have it too, and it's about the balance of the masculine and feminine, and the right and left brain, and spirituality and science. And so the dumbing down of our DNA and taking away immortality is just us forgetting, because these technologies are keeping us distracted, and with the static around our heads, we can't remember. And so we have to just bust through it. And the chemtrails is making it really difficult, because the aluminum, the heavy metals, the barium, strontium, all the things on the list are keeping us, it just makes it a lot more difficult. So you got to just kind of get away from it all and remember what counts, because I don't see that happening. People are rude to each other. Nobody really. It's just like, it blows my mind. And really, it's all about energy and frequency, and that's why sound healing is so important. And higher dimensional beings, their technologies are based on sound, color, and frequency, and they, heal through tone and sound and color, and and this is all vibration. Mind control is also vibration, but it captures us, and it captures our fears, and it's a dream warfare, type thing.
Yeah. Remember the placebo effect has been, studied and studied and studied, and in the end, they still do tests with a new chemical that a chemical company will make for you, and they'll still measure off the blind test, which says, like 40% of the people who didn't take anything at all still got better anyway. And that's our positive thinking can fix it. So if you're taking something you think is going to work and it still has an outcome, those people are better off for it. I'm going to tell you that, right? So
yeah, that's why it's all propaganda. It's like, it's all about belief systems and just like what. And the thing is, when you own something enough, it ends up beginning to manifest. Maybe not right away, like the book The Secret. I thought that was a little extreme, because we're dealing with, needing to plant seeds sometimes. It's not like always instant. Eventually it will be. But it's just, we got to believe in ourselves, Let's not wait for the governments. Let's not, let's believe in ourselves. And when we believe in ourselves, we can trust the people that show up in our lives a lot more. And we have more discernment and intuition. That's why we have to develop ourselves, because we don't know who to trust, and we should be very careful and watchful.
You said the perfect word there. I'm gonna say this. If you and I were world leaders, yeah, and we had no alien interaction with our planet. There was only 2 continents on the whole planet, and neither of us had actual contact with aliens. I just imagined it. It's a mythical planet, right? The first aliens that come and greet us, do we trust them? How do we trust them?
Right. And that's, we see this amongst cultures mixing, just when we look at our own human history, and just things, we even had to have civil rights and stuff. And so, a lot of that is a programming, but, but it is something that happens, I don't know. I mean, maybe that's a bad example, but, you know, when somebody's different, you got to just kind of step back and get to know it a little bit. And so that's a vulnerability that they took advantage of and created racism and created all these sort of movements to really screw us over and screw us up. And you know, people probably think I'm a crazy conspiracy theorist, and it's just like, oh, it's all because of them. It's because of them. Mm-hmm. Well, for part of it is, but the next part is us. You know, how much are we going to let them, you know, control us? It's ridiculous. So, you know, there's only them if there's us believing in their crap, and we've been vulnerable. So it's a part of our growth to, you know, rise above it and to recognize that, hey, this was a part of our initiation to really get back to who we are. But I think, you know, once we get rid of how we've been manipulated for having discernment, mm-hmm. you know, that little bit of caution, and we, you know, can get back to that being a good tool to work with, you know, it does make sense that, you know, we would be like that. And then the next stage would be, you know, finding a common ground and then, you know, moving closer and bonding in a very, you know, understandable way. You know, starting off with boundaries and then opening the heart slowly instead of, you know, too quickly, because that's what agendas do. They manipulate, and people give their trust away too fast. They don't have discernment, and they don't gently let down the boundaries once they feel that that person is worthy of mm-hmm. their trust, you know. Instead, we're born into it and we give it away right away because our parents tell us to, and they don't realize what's happening.
I completely understand. We've only got about 4 minutes left, and for my whole life I've had a vision of the end of the world. I know where it is, I know when I'm going to be, I know where I'm going to be, what I'm with, who I'm with. It's my entire life I've had a vision, and I'm now in that place. I'm now in the place that I'm living at. I'm now working at the place that I work at. I know what's going to happen. I don't know when it is, but I know that something's going to happen. The global ending timeline. Tell me more about that. We've only got a few minutes left, and I'd love to be able to cover that off.
Yeah, and I'm sorry. I know I talk so much with every question.
I love it, though.
Well, I mean, yeah, here we are, and it's like, it's the end, it's the beginning. Death is cyclical. It's never been linear. So there is no end without a beginning, and this is a major breakthrough. And so, yeah, the world as we know it is dying away, but something beautiful is emerging. And if we can just get a grip during this time, we will, you know, continue to become more empowered and more expanded. But if we freak out and we just keep looking to the externals and we keep looking outside of ourselves, there's plenty of traps out there that are going to take us off course. But even if that's the case, we have the chance to get back on track, because that's the kind of path that we've been given. You know, that's why the Fool card's the most advanced card, because it falls down and gets back up again. But there's going to be certain things put in place that are going to make it a lot more harder if we don't do it now, because this is the window period. It ends in about 2017, and that's when major bifurcation is going to be happening. Those who have chosen to stay zombies or stay controlled, and those who have said, I'm done with this, I'm moving on. And this, you know, little bit of where it's overlapping is where we're trying to help as many as possible wake up. But we're ready to move on, and we'll leave footsteps behind. But, yeah, it's the end and it's the beginning.
So what's Alt 1, Alt 2, and Alt 3? You've mentioned this before.
Well, those were just basically scenarios put in place to sort of manipulate these end times, mm-hmm. you know, that we would have to evacuate the planet or go into underground bases in the event of disasters. But because HAARP and superstorms and controlled disasters or disasters that are created through technology, we know that the Armageddon end times, those disasters aren't necessarily natural. And so we got to really look at that, because Mother Earth doesn't need us to evacuate. And if she did, she would be balancing her body, and we should accept that balancing act. If it was organic, we shouldn't be, you know, too concerned. But yes, it makes sense to protect the human genome. But this was done in a manipulative way, because these technologies are creating the disasters. And the only end times that was going to happen with disasters was simulated with superstorms. And we're still dealing with that. So these alternatives were for the elite, not for the human race. The human race needs to know what's happening so that the Earth can correct itself, and we can be a part of that correction. We won't get wiped out if we're on her side, you know. But if these technologies are creating superstorms, then we are, you know, the elite are evacuating the planet, and we're going to be what, in New World Order when they come back with half the population thinned out, you know. So we got to do the organic route. We just got to develop ourselves, and you know, these alternatives point to some of these artificial agendas, I believe. And if they weren't artificial, they're showing us something we need to face right now and how we choose. And transparency is extremely important when it comes to disclosure, so that we know what we're up against, and everybody has the right to know.
I completely agree with every single word you've said.
Yay!
Yay! Do you know what, Laura? This has been amazing. I just wish I had 4 hours.
Oh, I know.